Hey, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? It is your boy Johnny, and welcome to the ultimate comparison or Nintendo Switch versus Nintendo Switch OLED versus Lite and Nintendo Switch 2. As you guys know, I have every single Nintendo Switch here, starting with the OLED, the Switch 2 that recently came out, and the original Switch, the OG Switch, and as well as the Nintendo Switch Lite. I decided to put them from the biggest to the smallest. As you guys can see, this is a great comparison of the Nintendo Switch. As you guys can see, the Nintendo Switch 2 is definitely one of the bigger consoles from the Nintendo Switch, and then the OLED making it kind of like the second biggest one, and then the original Switch, the third one, and the smallest, the Nintendo Switch Lite. We're going to go ahead and look at the consoles of each one and rate the comparisons and what I think about the quality builds and everything from every Nintendo Switch comparing to the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, one thing that I want to mention right off the bat is that obviously the Nintendo Switch 2 is the most powerful console here, but I gotta say that I personally like some of the other stuff of the other Nintendo Switches because they have a lot of different ergonomics. First one that we're going to do side by side comparison is going to be the Nintendo Switch OLED and as well as the Nintendo Switch 2. Now I decided to go with the OLED first simply because the OLED I feel like is still one of the most premium products that Nintendo has ever released in terms of Nintendo Switch. And obviously the performance on the Nintendo Switch 2 is better, but just look at the size of the Nintendo Switch OLED and the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. As you guys can see, it is way smaller. I personally think it is humongous what they did with the Nintendo Switch 2. It's a big difference. You're going to be noticing it a lot. Maybe the screen size is not too much of a difference, but in terms of Joy-Cons and everything, it is more different. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the OLED and some of the things that I think are definitely really missed out on the Nintendo Switch 2. A lot of people were saying that the Nintendo Switch OLED screen, well, it's not that much different from an LCD. If you never had an OLED panel or a Nintendo Switch with an OLED, you would not understand this. The OLED is still by far 10 times better, and it's just 100% better. Yes, the Nintendo Switch 2 screen has 120 FPS capability on handheld mode, and yes, it has HDR. But let me tell you something about the HDR on the Nintendo Switch 2. It's not that great. If you guys know about HDR, it's not that great. I think you will still get better, um, deeper black levels on the Nintendo Switch OLED, even though it doesn't have HDR on the Nintendo Switch OLED. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the build quality is definitely better, especially the screen is better. In my opinion, the screen is still 100% times better. Another thing is that I like the feel more on the Nintendo Switch OLED because it has more of a metallic feel in certain areas. I think the stand here is more metallic. It just feels more metallic. They're still plasticky, don't get me wrong, but it just feels better to me. The quality is just better overall, in my opinion. I think the design was really done well. This was the ultimate Nintendo Switch, in my opinion. Um, and it still is a really good Nintendo Switch, in my opinion. So I personally like that. Obviously, you have your standard, if you guys already know, your headphone jack and everything. Um, and in terms of limited editions, obviously we got more limited edition OLED switches than um, anything else. So yes, the limited editions that came out already gives it an advantage as well for like Scarlet Violet, or if you decided to get the Zelda version, that's one of the main benefits of the OLED as well. More customability, which I'm pretty sure that the Switch 2 in the future will have limited editions, but as of right now, we're stuck with that. As for the Joy-Cons, I actually prefer the smaller Joy-Cons. A lot of people are saying that, oh, they prefer the bigger ones. I prefer the smaller ones. The only thing is the stick drift was a big problem that people had, but if you manage to fix it with getting the magnetic Hall stick joy pads or whatever, then you would have fixed your stick drift issue. So overall, I prefer these kind of Joy Cons, and as well, there was more colors and stuff released, which I'm pretty sure is gonna happen with the other Joy Cons. But right now, you only have the option of black for some reason. So they didn't really do anything much on that end. As terms of software and everything, you already know the software really doesn't matter at this point on the Nintendo Switch OLED because everything's going to perform better on the Switch 2. Alright, so now let's get to the Switch 2 in this comparison. As you guys may know, the Switch 2 is a great console. It does have a premium quality feel. I'm not going to say that it's the cheapest feel in the console, but compared to the OLED, it's just a big difference. Um, the Joy-Cons, personally, they do feel better. I mean, they are bigger. However, I feel like these might not have the best sticks. They may have fixed the, part of the issue for the most part, but I feel like we're going to get drift again on Joy-Cons. I don't know. They still feel cheap. And I was watching a disassembly video, and somebody was saying that it was feeling kind of weird. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was the HDR. Trust me, the HDR is bad in here. I don't know why people were trying to say that it was pretty decent, but HDR sometimes gives you more brightness, and it does. It's pretty bright, but it's one of the cheaper HDRs. It's like 400, which isn't the best. And the black levels doesn't really help it with HDR. If you guys see it right there, my screen is pretty bright. So I would say it's pretty cheaply made. But overall, obviously this one has a better, as we call it, it has a better, it has a better processor and everything, which is pretty much standard on the Nintendo Switch 2. Alright, let's move on to the next console and let's make some comparisons. Alright, so we have the Nintendo Switch 1, the original model, and this is definitely a big difference in terms of Nintendo Switch and quality and everything. So I'm not gonna blame Nintendo for actually making the Nintendo Switch 1, but I gotta say the quality on this one is probably the worst Nintendo Switch you can get, in my opinion. I really couldn't play games on this after the OLED and the Switch Lite came out. I just felt that this was too cheap, for my opinion. But I will say they had some pretty cool releases. This was the Pokemon Pikachu and Eevee version that came out. This was expensive back in the day. I think it was like $300 or $350 at around that price. It probably still is expensive. It's going to be one of those limited edition Switches. And I had the Joy-Con still wrapped up somewhere. But basically, yeah, it has the Eevee and the Pikachu one when this came out. Don't get me wrong, it definitely was cool when it came out, but honestly, looking at it back now, it just feels really cheap. The Joy-Cons are obviously the same as the other one, but look, the stand here this was all pretty cheap. But one of the cool things about this one is that people homebrewed it really easily, so that was probably the benefit of it. But I don't really have much recommendations if you're getting a Nintendo Switch. It can still be a pretty cool device to use, but look, there's your Joy-Con drift from the original one. So yeah, I did not even touch it and it moved on itself. But if we look at the comparison in size, it's definitely significantly smaller than the Switch 2. I'm telling you guys, the Switch 2 is gigantic. It's almost as big as a Steam Deck. But I guess it's because of the performance. But I feel like in the future they're gonna make it more smaller, or they're going to be able to make it smaller, or they might even be able to make a light version. So I don't really have much to say. They are still the same as the OLED. This one is technically the same as the OLED. I think the OLED just had a better processor, but not really much of a difference. And I think the Switch 2 wins in this one. But hey, this was the original Switch. This is what started everything. But yeah, the quality is definitely not good anymore. And we finally are going down to our final Nintendo Switch. Now, this one is actually still one of my favorites. Believe it or not, I think I enjoyed this one the most before the OLED came out. It was simply because due to the size. Look at the size of the Nintendo Switch Lite compared to the Nintendo Switch 2. Like, it's significantly smaller. Like, literally, it is way smaller. The form factor, everything is just way smaller. And personally, I think that's pretty cool. As you guys can see, It's just a big difference. This device, believe it or not, I honestly think the screen probably wasn't the best LCD screen, but I gotta give you props. When you were seeing games on this smaller screen, they look really good for some reason. Like, this was very portable. You could carry this in your pocket, let alone it's still a pretty big device, but still, I would carry this in my pocket sometimes. I wear cargos, and I gotta say, this one was pretty decent. It was just way smaller. I'm not gonna lie, it's just way smaller. And I absolutely love the limited edition on the Switch Lite. There was just so many, like this Pokemon one was pretty decent. There was just so many of them that they made, and I really liked the Pokemon one. The screen was pretty bright in my opinion. It would have been nice to have an OLED version of the Lite, but this one was a pretty good screen as well. I think it was a little better than the original Nintendo Switch, or may have been on par. I feel like everything was a little bit brighter here, but not much of a big difference as the original Nintendo Switch. Now, the OLED is obviously 10 times better, but if you didn't really want to upgrade from the Lite to the OLED, I think this would have still been a great option to keep as a Nintendo Switch. So, props to Nintendo Switch Lite. I always thought it was one of the amazing consoles that Nintendo made. As you guys may know, the Switch 2 is still the best one, obviously, but super big, super big. A lot of people will like it. A lot of people won't like it, but it's obviously a big ass console. I just gotta say that it's still a big console. Don't get me wrong, it's really nice, but it is pretty big. I think in the future, Nintendo will definitely make a smaller version like the Lite. NVIDIA processors just tend to get better over time, and they're more energy efficient. So I've definitely seen the future might hold a smaller Switch Lite again, and I think they will do it. Nintendo's kind of always does that, and you know your boy is probably gonna buy the smaller one. I just hope they make a small light one for Nintendo Switch 2 with like an OLED screen or so. But overall, this one didn't have a stand, unfortunately, because it was meant to be portable, and I kind of dig that. I don't really mind it if it didn't have a stand. Um, this one I understand why it has a stand because it's bigger, but the portable smaller one didn't. I feel like this one's more personal. I would still play on this one to be honest if I was anyone that still had it. So yeah, overall that's the comparison, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to hit that like button.